lastly, in the last 3 to 4 years, with this issue of teacher evaluation, which we've picked up again and again in here, stop and think about the fact that this moves with teacher evaluation not to the school site, all right? It moves to classrooms. This data, all right, will basically now be collected by teacher, by students. And when you do that, you basically get the deepest possible drop that one can get with respect to where this work gets done. And when you build a structural shift like this from here to here, you change in some senses. You acknowledge certainly that this is the place where the work gets done, and so is this. But you in some senses deconstruct, if you will, the role of that old relationship. That's why it's so interesting for us to have in the room, all right, board members, management, and union leadership that in some senses are still responsible for this to the state, all right, for the sites, and very soon for classrooms as well. With parents having this data, with teachers trying to figure out what this means for them, for their students, and for their individual schools and classrooms. Right? Meanwhile, in the last 2 years, a change that almost no one in this room, I think, would have forecast, which is to say that this is as far as the federal government can go with respect to state control, except that there was language, again, back deep in here in the competitive pieces of this that said, if you basically stepped up to a thing called some sort of core curriculum, some attempt, obviously, to come back over here and say, what's the nature of this quality if we're still basically 30 to 40 percentage pieces apart with respect to individual states? And slowly, and not so slowly, all right, there is a strong push to a common core curriculum in the major areas. Math, of course, and English language acquisition early on, science right behind it in terms of a language, and lo and behold, I think, with enormous surprise, because not so much of this, but because in some senses of the pressure of the quality issue, within 6 months ago, 44 of the states have signed up to basically move themselves in various ways and in various speeds towards a common core curriculum. For all intents and purposes, the argument in this room is simply to say, pay attention to the changing structure. Because for all intents and purposes, this represents a federal system. And you find, all right, in the next 3 months, as the ESEA piece gets debated, you will find people all over this issue precisely because it feels to them and acknowledged for them, even though the states decided to do it. And now, of course, the federal government, particularly, and Joe can speak to this, all right, has gone quiet around any ownership of this at all because of the danger of being seen as affiliated with it. That's Dolan's commentary, all right? But meanwhile, if you establish the fact that this has gone high, all right, and it really is an international curriculum, and that you are moving deeply into data about almost every classroom and every classroom professional, all right, you basically have to understand that something has to be going on in the middle structure. And to make that explicit, to talk about it, to think about it out loud, and to ask ourselves the question of what we actually want to have happen here, all right? Not because we're playing games, not because we think this would be weaker accountability, all right? Not because in some senses we believe in state rights above all, but because we're trying to ask the deep structure function question of public education. Where is the best place to do these kinds of evaluations? Where is the best place to hold accountability, clear and crisply, all right? And in some senses, how to do that without devolving into polarized debates that are more political than deeply analytical with respect to best practice around education. But long story short, you'd have to ask yourself some tough questions around the value added of this structure. And you'd particularly have to ask yourself a question such as one certainly is in Illinois, why you needed 900 of these to deliver quality for children in the state of Illinois. What is the value added of 900 boards, 900 managements, 900 organized labor groups, particularly, all right, if you now knew that you had or were moving very quickly towards a national curriculum, and you knew that you were going to hold this level and have good data to hold this level of the organization and the profession accountable for results against, for all intents and purposes, an international curriculum. It certainly, for me at least, calls into question this middle set of structures. Now, politically, people are going to stay fairly far away from that. You will hear firefights up and down the street, I think, as this thing comes out of the markup in the Senate and moves to the House. And you'll hear historical arguments about the death of the nation if this group interferes, all right? The death of the nation if local control is lost over calculus, whatever that means, all right? The death of the nation if Arkansas and Montana can't go separate ways with respect to the definition of English or math. But in general, we ought to be crystal clear that this does affect us with respect to who we are, our attempt to be professional voices that really believe in the deep quality here, all right, as we move through this vortex of continual change. And everybody's guess is as good as mine in the room about what's going to hold, but certainly pieces of this are going to hold. The 44 states are not going to walk away from that Common Core curriculum and what it means about quality. There may be some weakening, if you will, of the short-term quality. There'll certainly be extensions of the forced march of improvement, all right? But there certainly, hopefully, will be language around very poor schools with children at 20% on these core curriculum, making no changes at all of improvement over years, being in some senses allowed to exist. Somebody has to have the responsibility to step in and ask tough questions around that. If SIG is not the right answer with the right solutions, certainly there is a rightness to the toughness of the social justice issue around those failing schools, for whom they exist, for whom in some senses there is no escape. Right, those are the right questions for all of us to be asking, and we all know that. And the piece that's powerful here is that although, again, this is still framed as, in some senses, a hunt for poor teachers, this does represent for us this classroom focus, the ability to gather multiple measures, the ability to add richness and depth to our, what we know as best practice. This allows the profession to take control of itself. It allows the profession to say, this is who we are, this is what we believe in, this is what we are willing to be measured about, and this is the kind of growth for 30 and 40 years we want to be part of with respect to our lives as professional teachers. That's the opportunity here, apart from all of this. There will be political circus in here and everything short of it. But the doors are open for us to take the profession in the very best sense and to do so collaboratively with our administration, our parents, and so forth. I think after all is said and done, that's why we think this is such a critical moment. And that's what Turn, in some senses, should represent, is a place for us to go after that, straight up. So that's our little run in our ongoing saga of changing structure, changing function, and the next time we meet, we probably will have, again, a new national piece of policy that will do some adaptations, and so it will be fun to go back to our hero and see where on the cliff he's dangling. That'll keep our background discussion going as we move through the next 2 days as well.